Hey folks, it's Claire from Impactful People. Thanks for joining us for another episode. This week I am joined by the fabulous Beth Fisher. Beth, would you like to give us a quick intro to yourself?
Yes, I would. Hello, everyone. I am Beth Fisher. I am a freelance journalist, done work with BBC and ITV, and I'm just started a job as a lecturer at Swansea University. So trying to use the one brain cell I have. So getting used to that at the moment.
No, I'm so excited to have you on here because obviously we have known each other for a little while. I think I was trying to remember actually what year it was we first met, but too long ago in the early 2000s, playing
Yeah.
hockey. And you've had a really interesting career, which I think is lovely. I'm a big fan of a wonky career path and people experiencing different things. I think you learn a hell of a lot, but you've also played a lot of sport at a really high standard, and I think you learn a lot about leadership and being part of a team and a community through all of that as well. So I would love to know a bit about kind of where your career started. What was the first job you ever had?
Oh goodness, where do we start? Yeah, I guess I was thinking about this, and I guess the first proper job I had was I was a lifeguard in my year out. I did so badly in my A levels that I didn't really have any choices for university, so I took a year out and I was a lifeguard, which was goodness me. There's a few stories about that, but yeah, it was amazing actually. Really, obviously, you're in a pool. Literally not like Baywatch style, unfortunately. We're talking about Clinician Cardiff, so you know, um, lovely green tracksuits. Um, yeah, and I just remember like kind of being on the shifts, and like the first shift was at 7, and you'd be on in their lifeguard chair, wishing someone would start drowning, which sounds really bad, but it was the most boring job in the whole
Oh yeah.
universe. I've spent the Euro Millions 50,000 times doing that job because you'd be sitting there. Thankfully, no one drowned on my watch, so we're okay. Yeah, that was my kind of like my I guess gap year job, and then really I'd say, I mean, again, I was thinking about this, which kind of set me off into the sport world, was when I was in university. I worked part time for Welsh Netball as PA to Julia Longville, who was high performance director then, and I was doing it alongside my university career, and I think it was one of the best things I ever did because it kind of got me into that world of industry, but
Mm.
still kind of, I was being a student, but taught me really valuable skills. And kind of got me into that network of knowing people, which to this day I would say to everyone. Fast forward a little bit, that your contact book and your key contacts are kind of key to anything, really.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? I mean, I remember when I first got into technology, it was through a guy who was very senior in Barclays, but I knew him because we played at the same hockey club. Like, I had no experience in that area, but he knew me, so he was
Yeah.
willing to give me a shot. So, yeah, I totally agree. And one of the things I think is really interesting, you talk about working with a high performance coach. I think high performance has been such a big topic in sports for like forever, but it's still, I mean, it's definitely more of a thing in the workplace. But what was your kind of takeaways about what high performance meant when you were in that first role within netball?
Goodness, that's a really good question. I think at the time I was 19, so I was just getting into the senior team for hockey. So it was kind of understanding what elite looked like. Okay, and it
Mm.
wasn't, obviously, you can talk about the pitch stuff, but it was actually like that standard. So Julia Longville, she's like a professor now in education. She had really high standards. And I just remember thinking, actually, yeah, I might just be a PA, normally counting kit in a cupboard or whatever, but I will be the best at this.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I still remember this piece of feedback she gave back now, and I was just like, wow, thanks, and it meant a lot. And I think it was then I realized, okay, you can do a job, um, and complete it, or you can do a job, complete it to the best of your ability. So with that job, I guess that was kind of the first thing where I was like, oh, actually, if you do that extra bit of work, it does get noticed, and I think it makes you better at what you're doing.
I was getting real Ted Lasso flashback vibes then when you were talking about counting kit in the storeroom. Ends up being the most important job ever. Um,
Exactly.
okay, yeah. So also, I'd love to know, kind of at that point, even though you were only 19, what kind of can you remember what you thought success was?
Oh, it was all about hockey, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not afraid to say that I was a terrible hockey player. I just had a good engine on me. and all I wanted to, I was so obsessed with playing hockey for Wales. Like that was all I cared about. So that was kind of like, I didn't even really care about education. I knew that I had to get a degree to get a job. So I kind of knew I had to kind of do that, but all I wanted to do was just play and train and do that. And that was kind of, I'm definitely probably up into the age of middle early 30s. I was doing jobs that allowed me to do my hockey.
Yeah,
So, that's a long time really, isn't it? From the age of probably 15 when you get into the underage stuff of like
yeah.
prioritizing something.
Massively. And I think I was talking to one of our mutual friends about this the other day in terms of like how much it impacts your sense of self and identity. And work's similar. I think a lot of us who have been athletes, when you leave sport, whatever level you've played at, and when it's been such a big part of your life, like you said, everything else is about enabling you to do that thing. When you step away from that thing, you have like massive identity crises and not sure who you are without it. And then I personally have tried to fill that through work. Like, I find a lot of my identity in myself through the work, but then that comes with its own challenges and problems. And I think there's a lot around who you are outside of all of those things as well. Did you find that a challenge, moving from kind of sole focus being hockey to how do I move into a career and refocus my energies?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's an ego thing in it, let's be honest. And I think I struggled with that, before I was Beth the hockey player, and everyone kind of knew me as that. And it had the kind of, you had a bit of a swag because you played for Wales. And then you, well, definitely for me, was getting worse and worse. Body was getting terrible and I was getting crapper and crapper. And all these youngsters were flying by me. And I was thinking, God, who am I, And I would say that's when I then got into the media stuff because I needed something to fill that ego void,
Yeah,
right? And they're so similar when you do reporting, especially in sport and hockey. That there's an adrenaline attached to it, and that's the only thing I would say that has got close to like having that ego fix is when you're reporting live at an event because it's just that, oh my goodness, it's in that moment and anything could happen. But listen, nothing will ever compare to playing hockey, especially in those brilliant like kind of middle 20 years when you're with your best mates, playing the best hockey you can.
yeah.
But I've tried to get close.
I think it's different, isn't it? Like, this is kind of one of the things I've learned the hard way. Like, I think everyone does as they get older is like, what is success to you and what's important to you just evolves and changes so much, doesn't it, as you get older. And I'd love to dig into a little bit as well around the ego side of things, because I think that's really interesting. And did it help you? Did it hinder you? Like, how, and what, when you say it was an ego thing, what does that really mean to you?
Yeah, really interesting. And I think if I look back now from that transition from hockey to media and then, going from BBC kind of freelance then into an ITV role, I think, especially doing TV and you kind of get a bit of an attention, I think you have to really ride the line. Listen, I'm talking Wales stuff. I'm not, we're not talking Gabby Logan style here. This is in my own little world, this is
You're
what
our
we're
Gabby
talking.
Logan, Beth. You're our
Um,
Logan.
I think oh goodness, no. But you do have to, and I definitely there were times when I probably look back, and we've had a conversation recently about maybe my behaviour for a couple of years. So maybe those people around me who know me for long probably went over that line of being too into the ego stuff. And yeah, I guess when you're achieving something that you've always wanted to do, which for me was TV,
Yeah.
and that full-time job as a sport reporter doing it every day, I think you can get definitely carried away in your own world. And I think you've got to be really, it takes a strong person to step back and go, all right, I'm getting a little bit too big, like too egotistical
Yeah.
in my boots. But at the same time, I've met people who in the industry, and it's a hard industry, and no one will back you. It's quite competitive as well. So if you don't back yourself, then not many people will. So I don't know. Yeah, I guess that's why I kind of look at that ego thing, and I think I definitely went a step too far. And when we talk about success, which we'll talk about later on, I think I soon realised actually success does come in many forms.
Yeah.
And yeah, we'll talk about what I think success is later anyway.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you as well for being so open, because I know, it's hard, isn't it, reflecting on this stuff. I think one of the hardest things that you do as a leader, or any time in your career, is you have to just pause and reflect on who you are a lot of the time, and how you're behaving, and the choices that you're making, and who you want to be and show up as. And it's a lot. Um, yeah, there's so much. One thing I would be interested in, actually, is you talked about the industry being quite competitive, and I think that is a real challenge. But did you have anyone within the industry, like, I'm trying to think about the culture that's there with the people that you're working with. I know when you're freelance, that must be quite different to when you're like embedded within a team. But how did you find that, like the culture and the people that you're working with? Were they encouraging you to behave certain ways, or would they call you out on your shit? Like, how did that work?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue I had at ITV was when you're full time at any media role, and I'm sure it's the same for other industries, is that you've got to be really careful about your social media stuff. And I'm a huge advocate for equality. Whether that's race equality, obviously being gay myself, obviously I'm highly, highly, I guess, what's the word I'm trying to look for? Highly motivated for all parts of the LGBTQI community to be treated as one. And there were times when my views and my kind of comments on social media were basically, I was told it wasn't appropriate for someone
Mm,
working for the media, because you have to be impartial. And I guess that's kind of was my biggest battle, being my authentic self and being that voice, because I guess that's what I pride myself on, right? And some people could probably say it's gobby and it's too much, but I have had so many messages from people in various forms and subjects saying thank you for talking out. I can't because of my job I'm in, or I can't because
mm.
I don't have the strength to. And I feel like genuinely, if I help one person with my gobbiness, then that means more to me than, well, probably at my job, which is really stupid because it pays the bills.
No,
Um, but yeah,
I
that was probably the biggest conflict.
it resonates so much with me, that, because I think we live in this society that creates a world where, well, not just society, we live in a world, you need money to live, you need money to feed your family, you need a house, and the size of that house and the volume of food is, consumerism. But everything else is, we're driven to have to do these things to live a certain lifestyle, to be able to survive and even thrive to some extent. But actually, the thing that does make you thrive is the things that you're passionate about, and that bring you energy and bring you joy. And
Yeah.
you, I think, are very good at articulating some of the things that people struggle to articulate but want to articulate. And what is it they say? If you're something about, if you're upsetting people, you're normally doing something right, like you're driving change. If nobody says anything about any of the stuff you're saying, you're probably not hitting a nerve with anything. So um, it is. I can imagine that being a really difficult balance, though, of, this is who you are on one hand, this is the career you want, and those two things aren't aligning and letting you be your true self. So how did you kind of try and deal with that at the time?
I don't think I dealt with it very well. It got to a point in a certain job where I was told, "You do this again, and you're out."
Mm,
And there was other stuff going around as well, but in the end, I was like, "I can't. This job is not only consuming my life in terms of doing it, because I was, working. God, not just hours in the day, but mindset. With this sport, there's always a story, so it's constant, right?" But then I was kind of like, well, I am having to give up a huge part of who I am. So yeah, I left that job and went into another media thing, and again you have to kind of toe the line, but I was freelance, it was a little bit easier. But it was a genuine thing about when, after I had the baby, about coming back, I was like, I enjoy that part, I enjoy campaigning, I enjoy that, like you said, driving for change, and I don't want to be put in a box.
mm.
um do I cross the line sometimes? Probably, but 99% of the time, like, I think personally, I'm just in a place where I'm speaking out for a minority who at the moment are getting absolutely bombarded with hate in every direction. And to be honest, doing a couple of tweets and Instagram posts is the very least that I can do. So I'm going to keep on doing it, basically.
Yeah, more power to you, I say. Um, I guess we jumped ahead a bit as well. And I think I'd love to know how you actually made that transition from, like, practically how you made the transition from sports to media. Because, like you said, you know, you'd not really had a role like that ever before in the past. So, was it through connections? Did you apply to jobs? How did you go about that?
Yeah, I mean, again, and I would say to anyone, right, and I'm just starting this new role as a lecturer, and I'll say it to my students, is that actually the one thing that sets me apart from a lot of people within the industry is my contact book. And that
Mm.
is because I've just done a whole range of different jobs, right? I've been working in national governing bodies, I've been on the board, I was a medical rep for 8 years, working in sport, met people that way. Obviously, then when you're on the weekend beat doing freelance stuff for BBC, you know, you're meeting people, and it is those connections. And with BBC, I guess when I was about 34 when I decided I wasn't doing hockey anymore, and I kind of pestered a little bit. I did definitely pester someone I knew, but his name is Graham Davis, and he's a really good advocate for women within sport with BBC Wales. And um, yeah, I just came up with a couple of ideas, and I think because I was a bit older as well, I think I had the guts to kind of go, do you know what? I don't care what anyone thinks about me. Yes, I'm new. Um, I'm going to just do this. And actually, I've still got this full time job. I'm a medical rep, so that's paying the bills. But I will do this on free days and Saturdays and Sundays, and maybe evening work. So my days are really long. But I'll do it and be enough of a pain in the ass that they actually just keep on offering me stuff. And
Yeah.
yeah, and that's what happened. And I guess the ego, yeah, go on.
No, I was just going to say, I remember, like, you just do whatever you needed to, and I think you're right. There is always an element in your career that sometimes you do just need to earn money to power the things that you need to do, but there's always something you can take away from each of those roles. And if that is contacts, or if that's learnings about yourself, or you know, anything else about the workplace, then there's always value in whatever work that you do. So I think that's, yeah, really interesting. And I also remember you, I think it felt like you had a different job every week, but partly because I probably didn't see you that frequently. So were there any particular
Yeah, I mean,
skills? Oh, you go. Sorry.
no, go on.
I was going to say, do you think there's any particular skills that you learned through sport that helped you when you moved into the workplace, whichever kind of role that was?
Yeah, I think because of my hockey journey was probably a little bit different to everyone else in that genuinely, I'm not joking, I was rubbish at school, and I went to the sports hall because I was so obsessed with doing well in it. I went to the sports hall every day for about a term and practiced on my own. And I think because I knew, just like then in hockey, just like when I went into the media world, that there was a long route to do. I knew that actually, if you put your mindset to it, and genuinely, it sounds so cringe, but if you do work your ass off and take the things and say yes to things that other people say no to, like really rubbish things, which you're like, I remember, and I always say this to people, I you know, who ask me now, right? Taking on jobs that they were miles away on a Saturday night when everyone's going out, and I'm talking like radio stuff, and it's winter, freezing, and in my mind I would be like, this is the last thing I want to do. And whenever I took those jobs, something would happen which would elevate me to the next level again. And I don't know what it was, but I don't know whether it was some magical person looking over me, but it made me think, yeah, you have to do the hard work, you have to do the grit, because when you do that as well, when you do the grit, you know that when you reach another step of the ladder, that you've got some safety net because you've done it the hard way.
Mm. Yeah, it's so true. And also, I
And
think,
I
you know,
think that, yeah,
going back to the connections as well, like those connections remember you because you did the hard work. You can't just rock up and be like, hey, I'm Beth or Claire, and you'll remember me in the future, but they remember you because of what you did in the time that you worked together.
yeah, definitely. And I think as well, it's being human about it as well. And I think, yeah, I know I talked earlier about an ego thing, but I think wherever you go and whoever you meet, you've got to have a kind of sense of humility around yourself, like, because first of all, and this sounds a bit cringe again, and a bit cheesy, but you never know what day someone's having, or week, or month, or year. And I definitely learned that when I lost Nia, my best friend, with grief, is that you never know what someone's going through. But also, as well, even when I was a medical rep and I was going around measuring people's ankles, is that sport is often a common uh, relationship kind of builder between people. Like a
Yeah.
lot of people like sport, whether they just watch it on the TV or they know something. So again, it was kind of like having the ability to talk about something which you're not very familiar on, but
Mm.
opening those connections. And yeah, that seems to have worked for me. And I think it's not hard. You just have to have, yeah, just to have that confidence to be able to do that, I guess.
Yeah, I think there's a bit here about resilience as well, because there will have been setbacks you've had throughout. We've talked about kind of the happy path of like, yeah, you worked hard, but an opportunity is just a magical fairy opens the doorways for you. But there must have absolutely been setbacks that you faced throughout that time. So what do you think some of the hardest or most biggest challenges were that you've kind of had to work through?
I think in my recent kind of, we talk about the most recent career, which is media. I remember obviously going into BBC Wales, and it was radio, and I love radio. I think it's a medium of media which is just it's amazing in the way you have to describe things. But like a lot of people, everyone's obsessed with being on TV, right? Because that's the
Mm.
glamour. That's the glamour. So I was given this chance to do a bit. So I was given this chance to do a little bit of live something, and I was the most nervous I've ever been in my life. I was like, I could barely breathe. I did this piece to camera and I spoke to my boss afterwards. And this is the same Graham, but it's funny when I look back now. And I said, "Oh, what do you think?" And he went, "I'll be honest with you. You look like a crab walking sideways on crack cocaine." So that so that
Excellent.
was with BBC. That was my that was my kind of like chance, I guess. And I looked at it and it was absolutely terrible. It was awful. And then I realized probably I should stick to radio. And then the next time I was on TV, it was my interview for ITV Wales. I was in a studio doing blinking reading off an auto cue, which I'd never done in my life, thinking, what the hell am I doing here? Um, and the mental strength to try and block out this "you look like a crab on crack cocaine" point was something quite incredible, because I was in the back of my mind, like, literally, don't sound like a crab on crack cocaine. But yeah, and I got that job. But then, and I guess that's kind of probably one of my proudest moments, to kind of go, okay, well, there was such a gap between those two moments, but they felt so close together because it was the two nearest experiences. Yeah, and I think genuinely, like, you have to be honest with yourself as well, though, and go and accept when something's really bad, and I think I did accept that point.
I think feedback like that is really difficult, isn't it? Especially when you've pinned so much on it. You've wanted this moment for so long and you think it's going to be something that it inevitably is never quite what you think it's going to be. But I'm loving Graham already, by the way, but did he also kind of help you through that in terms of, how to stop looking like a crab? And how did he work with you and help you get to a point where you could go and get other jobs elsewhere?
Oh no, and listen, and Graham will admit this himself. The BBC are hopeless at feedback. You don't get any. You do not get any feedback at BBC, unless you've genuinely, like, something so bad has happened that you could probably get off complaint. So, and then that's really difficult as well. And that's actually really, you've just reminded me of something about resilience in that hockey, right? And sport, you're constantly getting feedback. You can watch video, you can go to your coaches, whatever. In media, oh my god, you are on your own, and you'd rarely get a well done, even if you've done something well done. And that's, again, it's like, oh right, well, this is strange. Like, I want to be better, but you're not telling me to.
Hmm.
So it really is about that kind of finding out, and I'm working hard to find other avenues of, okay, feedback, and getting yourself to a place of better when you don't get that feedback.
Yeah. And I can imagine, I don't know, you tell me if that kind of pushes you even more towards you want that feedback on social media, you want that feedback from the public or anywhere that you can get it. Because I think as humans, we all need that reassurance or some form of feedback on how things have gone.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point. I think definitely my platform on Twitter, before it got taken over by the devil, is it was something I really enjoyed, interacting with the public. And that
Mm.
again was a really nice part, because it wasn't, they weren't saying well done, good job, but they were coming to me for information. I was giving them information. And that was really, really nice. And actually then being able to interview some of the biggest names in sport, and then getting something new out of them, and then feeding kind of the fans with that, was really exciting
Mm.
and really fun. And I think if I don't, obviously I've just started a job as a lecturer. If I don't do that type of journalism again, or reporting, then that's the bit I'll miss, because that interaction and getting that nugget, which, no one else knows,
Yeah.
is really exciting.
It feels to me there's a big thing here around like being the best you can be and being an expert, like getting that buzz off people knowing you're the
Mm,
person they can
yeah.
come to for that information, and that's what's driven you in some respects to just work your ass off on the things that aren't always fun so you can become that person.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I think as well, being a woman, and I was probably, I would say, 99% of the time, and it changed slightly at the end of working for BBC and ITB, I was definitely the only woman, and everyone was white. So, there'd be people who were in the press pack who had been around 40, 30, 20, 10 years, way longer than I. I'm coming in, I've not been trained as a journalist or sports reporter. I'm coming in, and I probably pissed a few people off, because they're probably thinking, who the hell's this girl asking these questions?
Yeah.
And I probably did ask questions that no one else asked, because I was also coming from a point, well, actually, guys, I'm the only person in this room who's actually played for the country as well. So you can say what you like and leave me out of conversations, but I probably have more of an idea what these guys playing rugby or football, or girls playing football or rugby, or whatever sport it was. I have more of an idea what it was like for them than you do. So it is again like having a kind of that fine line between ego and humility, but also having the confidence, knowing that you've got all this information, all these years that you've worked at something, to
Mm.
back up where you are now.
Yeah.
And I think that then made me feel a little bit invincible in terms of being in that room.
I agree. I think it's a really challenging thing to do, because you're right. You've got this huge amount of experience, and not just you. I speak to lots of people who have huge amounts of experience, and then you go into a real male-dominated environment, or you know, even like the environment you're talking about, whether it's male-dominated or not. There's not much feedback. There's not much support. There's not real like you're in it together. You're kind of
Yeah.
fighting for yourself. So how do you cope in that environment without having to kind of shield yourself a bit, and you have to convince yourself that you're good enough to be there before you can go and convince everyone, or you fake it till you make it, right? You have to go in quite hard in those environments because people are going to keep telling you you're not good enough.
Yeah. No, fake it until you make it will be on my gravestone. I think that actually everyone really has an ounce of what the F am I doing here, and how have I got here? And I think also I remember someone saying to me, who I used to work with ITV, I was so nervous all the time doing lives. It was probably why I won't do live TV again, because I used to get, my nerves got the better of me, and I just didn't enjoy it as much as I should. But he said to me, do you know how many thousands of people would die to be in the position you're doing? And so, and I was like, how, you're right. I'm not talking about something horrendous. I'm talking about sport. 99% of the time it was sport, and everyone kind of, it's one of those subjects which is, everyone likes hearing about. What if you like sport? It
Yeah.
wasn't about, I wasn't a health correspondent or political, it was the fun stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, so you've got to realize as well that actually at the end of the day it is just sport. So
Mm.
you know what it's like. There's a lot of egos flapping around sport, and sometimes I wasn't phased by, about, whether it's Gareth Bale or, I don't know, Alan Wynne Jones. They didn't. I wasn't like, oh my god, because I kind of was like, well, actually, there's a million of you out there. You just happen to play football and rugby and earn a lot of money. But I always remember thinking, try doing what we did.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I think some all these people are put on pedestals for, you know, just it's fluke, isn't it? The thing that you're good at, like, and also you've been good at it at the right time, in the right
Yeah.
moment, in the right place. And there's people all over the world doing amazing things that just they're not going to make millions from, and they're not going to be famous for. But it doesn't make it any less valuable what they're doing. In fact, probably more valuable in a lot of areas. Um, yeah, and I think sometimes people need to be interviewed by people that, well, most of the time, need to be interviewed by people who aren't going to be all flustered, because you make it more real and more human for everybody. And you're more likely to ask them the tougher questions, I think, than someone who's just completely in awe of someone the entire time.
No, definitely. And I think that's a privilege as well when you get to sit across someone who, I mean, when I remember interviewing Warren Gatland, I was the last interview he did before he went to back to New Zealand. Obviously, he's come back since, so that's kind of ruined that. But I remember sitting down with him for half an hour, and this was a guy that I watched coach Wales for my entire 20s. So to have that privilege of sitting down and asking him questions that I thought people might want to know was
Yeah.
probably a really favorite moment of mine. Yeah, and I guess that is, like I said, the privilege of working in sport and being a sports reporter.
I mean, he's another person who's had to deal with lots of resilience, isn't he? So did you take away anything specifically from that conversation that really resonated with you?
Oh God, now you're asking. I can't remember half of it. Um, I think I'm trying to think now. You're asking me things, Claire. I can barely remember what I did yesterday.
I know, I'm
Um,
putting you on your toes.
no, I can't remember a thing. I actually can't remember. All I remember was it being a nice conversation.
I'm sure it resonated in the moment. I'm sure it did. Lovely. Okay, so yeah,
Yeah,
we
you can
talked
find it on YouTube if people want to watch it. Find it on YouTube.
perfect. We touched a little bit on success earlier, and I would love to know kind of your personal journey with what success has meant to you and how that's driven you, but also kind of where you're landing now as you're kind of going through this next career change and journey.
Yeah. Oh God, it's so funny, isn't it? Like you look back, especially like when we collected our Wales caps the other day. You think, goodness me, like that was my life at one point, and success. All success meant was how well did I play on the weekend, and how well did we do as a team, and whatever. I think I've thought a lot about this question, and if I'm being really honest, I would have said probably, let's think where we are now. Maybe 6, 7 years ago, I would have said it was to do with being a reporter, reporting at things, whatever. And yes, all right, you could say I've been, a success tick because I've done those. But I think losing Nia, who was my best friend, I think that success for me now is health and happiness. And that again may sound really cheesy and people might go, what the hell? But genuinely, if you don't have your health and if you aren't happy, right, you could have the best job in the world. You could, succeed at the thing that you've always dreamt of. But if you don't have those other two things, they're meaningless. And actually being able to share them with the people that you love most. And I think it doesn't matter what you do in life. And, I've had a daughter in the last year, and it's funny, before you have children, people say, oh, you want them to be successful in that. For me, if my daughter was happy with what she did and was healthy, that for me is success. And going forward now, yeah, I've landed an amazing job at Swansea Uni. My job is to teach the next generation, and I want them to be happy in themselves, because that will make them a better reporter, and it will make them a better journalist as well, because they will have hopefully empathy with people around them. So yeah, it's definitely changed, and I think everyone gets caught up, don't they, with success, whether it's money or house or sport. But as we know, if you don't have health and happiness, then what's the point? So that
Yeah,
for me is success.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it's really hard that you have to go through such tragic things often to realize actually what is important. But I think it's so cool what you're doing in terms of how you're thinking about sharing that with people at really important stages of their lives where, you know, there is a lot of pressure to live a certain way and do certain things and what society tells us success is. But I absolutely agree. I think, you know, happiness is just like so underrated. FYI, I did a really interesting
Yeah.
podcast with a guy who's a happiness researcher as well, just to link that back. And but we were talking there about the, you know, expectation of happiness, which is much more than just these moments of joy and pleasure, which are these fleeting experiences, but actually contentment and purpose are all massive parts of what shape happiness. And I think that's something I've always kind of had tried to strive for contentment, but felt that was a really boring thing to strive for. But it's not.
Mm.
It's the most magical thing ever, I think. It's just yeah, it's definitely more valuable than constantly chasing those moments of joy and pleasure that we know are incredibly fleeting from the sports world, that you have your massive highs and your massive lows, which is exciting but also stressful.
You know, it's really interesting you said about contentment, because I've had to have a word with myself lately, because and it is my personality as well, but I'm never satisfied with not what I've got, but with where I am. I always want, okay, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? What's the next thing? And I think that is a result of sport, because you work in seasons and you work in selections and all that, and age groups and whatever. But you know, for me, I've had to really work hard of going, okay, well, I won't look up Rightmove for the next house, or I won't look for a job which I don't know,
Yeah,
and actually be satisfied with health and happiness, because you're right, contentment is such a huge part of that, because if you're not content, then you're not going to be happy, you. And I
yeah.
think that's definitely something I am having to work on myself, like, now.
Mm. It's so interesting. And do you think an element of that is because I agree, I think, you know, the sports world and stuff like that conditions you to constantly be thinking about the next thing and how to be better. And the world of work is the same, right? I've literally had that conversation with some people today about, you know, you're always going to have a CEO or a founder breathing down your neck going, why can't we go faster? Why can't we do quicker? Why can't we make it bigger? Go, go, go. So I think it is partly the world we live in, but I do think there's an element as well of you get to that thing that you thought you wanted, but it's never quite enough,
Mm.
or it's never quite what you really thought it was going to be. Or like even like buying the new car, you get really excited about this car, and then you get the car, it's exciting for a week, and then
Oh my
it's just a
god.
fucking car that you need to get MOT. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's the same. Often we're in this constant cycle of like, get the next thing, do, because then it'll give me this, and then I'll have that, and that's never it when you get there.
Yeah, literally, you kind of just described the last 10 years of my life. I went from BBC going radio, thinking all I want to do is TV. Did TV for 3 years. I was like, oh, I want to go back to radio and present.
Yeah.
And I did that, and then I was like, oh, okay, now what? And then I had a baby, so that kind of then just explodes your whole life, and actually makes you again
Reflect.
realize what on earth, reflect and go, oh my god, not only have I now I've got to actually be an example to my girl, and trying to drop all those bad habits and bad behaviors that that you've kind of just allowed kind of to drag behind you, and yeah, it's a challenge, because you don't also want to be fake, because I think I'm definitely too emotional and too obvious to kind of start being something I'm not. I can't do it. I know I'm in or out. But having to work on yourself at 41 is exhausting. um, but equally, I think I kind of wish I had this this kind of calmness about it all 20 years ago.
Yeah,
I
I know
think
what you mean.
about,
I always go back to the Baz Luhrmann song of, you know, you could tell yourself this 20 years ago, and there's no way you'd have a level of calmness over it, because you almost you have to go through it, don't you, and feel those horrible emotions to know you perhaps don't want to feel those things again, or it's like everything we were like, this is why we all become our parents, right? Because we realize we want to tell them not to climb the tree because it's going to kill them. It's going to kill when they fall out and graze their knee, but they won't feel it and understand it until they're falling out the tree. And it's the same when you're an adult, I think. You kind of have to go through those painful experiences yourself. It's all learning, isn't it?
I know, I know.
Well, I'm with you in the being 41 and still working on myself. I don't think it's ever ends. Oh God, fell off my chair. There you go. Great start. Okay, cool. So I would love to know if there's any like a couple of key lessons you've learned over the years. I mean, we've probably touched on some of them throughout the conversation anyway, but just to kind of wrap up, if there's any key lessons that you've learned that you'd like to share.
Yeah, I think whatever job you start in, um, and whatever level you're at, do not disconnect yourself from people of all other levels.
Mm,
Um, like when I started at BBC the second time, I was 35, but you know, I made sure that for the first 2 weeks I was there, I was literally the tea girl.
yeah,
And you have to understand your place, and I think understand the people around you, and work hard to build people's trust as well. So I think that's a big lesson, is that don't ever disconnect yourself, because actually at the end of the day we all go home, we're all human beings. So like don't get like as well, don't get too big for your boots if you come in at this level, and there's people at junior level or whatever you want to call it, because eventually one day those junior level people will probably be your bosses as well.
absolutely.
So yeah, that's kind of it. And I think as well, and I think when it comes to, I guess, working in a male dominated environment, it's not taking any shit,
Mm,
and actually calling out stuff, because I am probably known now as don't mess with her because she'll say something. And to be frank, if I don't win many friends because of that, I actually don't care. I have enough friends and I've got an amazing family. I would rather set a standard for people knowing that that behavior isn't acceptable in whatever place that is, than be the person that didn't say anything. And
yeah,
genuinely, and I think this comes back to being in school and being a little bit of a weirdo, which I'm a proud weirdo, is that I actually do not give a shit what people think about me. And that's the biggest freedom I could have. Because, if I've just met someone and they've been extremely rude, I'm going to tell them that. And I think if that then helps someone else, then again, it's kind of doing that work which maybe other people can't do.
Massively. I feel like I could talk to you about this forever now, because as someone who is not good at that, as you may remember, I'm not great at confrontation. I think it's really important to say what you believe, and that's definitely something I've had to work on myself throughout my career, because I've learned the hard way. Not having the difficult conversation makes difficult conversation 20 times harder. So, how do you like? Is that just who you are, or do you think there's something like that you've worked on resilience wise, and or the people you've got around you that gives you that sense of security and safety that enables you to be able to just go and have those challenging conversations?
I think it's definitely partly who I am.
Mm,
If I compare myself to my sister and we were brought up in the same household, it's definitely personality. So I would say as well that if you're not that personality type and it's going to cause you anxiety to do that, then don't do it. And of course, there's been moments, where I've gone too far and maybe, definitely crossed the line. But I think also being in the media world I have, and I've had a lot of trolling from people, like
mm,
horrendous stuff, and you have to naturally put a barrier up, because if you don't, and at the beginning, I'll be really honest, it really bothered me. Like the
yeah,
first time someone called me the C word on Twitter, my mum saw it and she was like, that's disgusting and gross like that. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me, but equally, I had that attitude, and I say this to my wife Neats as well, because we're in the same kind of industry. And sometimes she gets trolled. Would you have a 2-minute conversation with that person in Tesco's? And if it's no, then do not spend more than a second longer worrying
yeah,
about what they've got to say. And and quite recently as well, my last bit of work, I did the investigation into Welsh rugby, which was into misogyny and sexism, alleged misogyny and sexism. And that was a 2-year investigation which came out, and it caused major change in the union. But
mm,
am I unpopular because of it? Absolutely I am. But I
yeah.
genuinely said to myself, if this is the last piece of work I do, then I don't care, because if this makes change, then I've done my job. And it did. And I feel like I'm being a bit like, wow, look at me. But I think you've got to decide sometimes, what do you want to be remembered for?
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
not saying anything, or being the one that helped make a change. And if I can be a tiny, tiny cog in just creating a little bit of change or making someone else's life easier,
Yeah.
then that's what I'm happy with. And
I
that's
think
how I
it's
work.
so important that people like you exist and can do that. As someone who wishes I was more like that in some ways, but I watch people like you doing it, and and that's something like that. That investigation, it's just absolutely critical. And the more people like you are doing things like that, the more people will speak up because they're seeing change. It's when you speak up and nothing happens, and then a lot of negativity comes. It's you feel like you've made yourself very vulnerable for no return. When you see change happening, that inspires people to come together. And I think, we've talked before about community and collectives, and being able to bring people together to know that things are different, and they can be different, and they will be different if we speak up.
But it's interesting what you say, right? About, you don't necessarily speak up, you don't like confrontation. But I would equally say that you are a very value driven person.
Yeah,
And I think just because I'm loud and mouthy about it doesn't necessarily make your work any less invaluable because you don't speak up about it. But
yeah,
equally, people can trust that you have the right values
yeah. No,
in a
you're
different
right.
way. And I think that's just as important, that you have people of different
Yeah, you are right. I know my style is more subtlety, but I do also think there's multiple ways to drive change. So I've had to learn this the hard way about myself as well. Of like, because a lot of what I do is other people, which I love. That's what I love doing. But sometimes I pause. I'm like, what have I actually achieved in the last year? But it is this. You can drive change through subtleties as well. So you're right. We all there's ways to do it, whatever your kind of personality types and strengths are. But the best thing to do is to say something. It's just how you say that is like aligned to who you are.
Yeah, and I definitely haven't got that right a lot of times.
Oh, look, I think either way, we're all learning every day, aren't we? And the world around us is changing. This is my thing. You feel like you've caught up with what's happening and who you want to be and how you want to show up, and then everything changes or is constantly changing, and you realize you're behind again. But oh, Beth, honestly, it's been so insightful and helpful, and just a lovely chat in general. So thank you so much for making the time.
No, thank you. I've absolutely loved talking to you, Claire. Thank you very much for having me.
No worries at all.